You start this. All right. What I would like to do today is we turn our attention now as we begin Unit 4. The focus will be on exposition. And just to remind ourselves of where we are at, we have covered in the first 3 units, we've covered all the way through step 10, actually. The first unit, maybe this would be a way to do this. Our first unit, really what the focus was on the book as a whole. And we spent time looking at how to study first the book overall so that we could gain an understanding of the context of the book, the background, the author's flow of thought, these things. And then we spent time in Unit 2 really preparing for the passage level, which is the steps 4 through 8. And that is Unit 3 was where we focused on the passage level. So Unit 2 was doing, remember those painful days of grammar and looking at connector words and prepositions and phrases and all that kind of stuff. So we went through the suffering through that because it was preparing us to focus our attention on the passage level, which includes a block diagram and the textual observation, significant words, those things, because we were after the exegetical idea, that is the author's what, why, and how. And then we also gave attention to, as we turn the corner from the passage level, to give attention to, okay, now I'm preparing for the sermon. But there were the first 2 steps were really focusing our attention on what are the key truths within the passage, and also how do we apply them to ourselves. In Unit 4, we're going to give our attention now to the preparation of the sermon and its delivery. Okay, and that's going to really be the focus, will be these last 4 steps in that. What I thought would be helpful to do before we move on to that is to, again, as we consider get this straightened out for us here. Whoops, how did that happen? Oh, there we are. Okay. Is again this figure we've looked at several times, but reminding ourselves of the 2 parts to this, the exegesis part, where we're trying to find what the author meant, and then now our focus turns towards the exposition part, and that is essentially explaining to our hearers what the author means. What does he mean for them? And so that's going to receive our attention in this 4th unit together. Now, and then here I've just expressed if I could get it, there we go. Hopefully you can see this okay. Here I've expressed just sort of in a visual form. I don't know if you can see that real easily. Maybe you can increase the size here. Here we go. Just another way to look at this is the top half. We're moving towards understanding the author's intended meaning. That's the exegetical idea. We could say is the author's intended meaning. And then now moving away from that, we take the author's intended meaning, the exegetical idea, and move towards our hearers. And how can we take what the author said to his audience and explain that clearly to our audience, to our hearers, so that they would understand the truth and apply the truth. And again, obviously, this whole thing is going to be a work of the Spirit as we do our work. And so we must depend on him all the way through the process at every step, as we talked about together last time, that we should be praying during each step. We should be praying before and after, that God would give us insight, that he would prepare the hearts of those who will be listening to us to give them the insight and understanding as we explain the passage, and then to empower them to know how to apply it to their lives. But the real center point is the exegetical idea, because if we don't understand what the author was trying to say or was saying, then we're not going to accurately communicate that to our hearers. And so that's why this sort of is like an hourglass, where the center of it is the exegetical idea. That's what is most important. And once we have that, then we are ready to put together the sermon. All right. Now, what I wanted to, Lord willing, do this evening with you guys, and I think it will be helpful, is now that we have done all of the study on preparing to understand what the author is saying, I wanted us to go back to a passage that we looked at quite a while ago, Hebrews chapter 12, 1 and 2. And I wanted to spend our time this evening focusing our attention on this passage and applying some of the key passage level steps to this text, and try to put all together everything we've covered to this point by giving attention to this passage and looking at some key steps together. All right. So there'll be a little bit of a home exercise tonight that I'm going to have you guys do. And what we're going to do, Lord willing, is this. So I have here the Legacy Standard Bible translation for Hebrews 12. This is a new translation that's been put together by some guys at Master's Seminary, Master's College. And I've been reading from it. I really appreciate some of they took the New American Standard and made some modifications and updates, and I think they did a really good job. So I wanted to have us sort of dive into that translation by looking at Hebrews chapter 12. And what I'm going to have us do is walk through this diagramming step so we can do the diagram together, and then from that find the exegetical idea from the passage, and then from that identify the timeless truths. All right, so basically hitting those key steps that we've sort of as a summary or review of all that we have covered from the last 3 units together. Okay, and so here's the passage. I'm going to ask if Fu-Wei can read this, Hebrews 12, 1 and 2. And then once he reads from that, I'm going to have you guys do the first 2 steps of the diagram, which I'll explain in a minute. Well, actually, let me do that now, and then we'll start. So again, remember, in identifying the diagram, we want to first identify the main sentence, the independent clause in the passage. All right, that'll be the key thought. And then secondly, if you guys remember, let's identify the phrases and clauses by finding the connector words. So I want you to do those 2 steps together after Fu-Wei reads the passage. See if you can find the independent clause, and then secondly, see if you can find the connector words, which will identify the phrases and clauses. Okay, and of course, remember, here are the key ones that are most common. All right, any questions on that? I know you were hoping we could avoid doing any more of this, but I think as you continue practicing the diagramming and these kind of things, that you're going to get better at it, and you will find that it's going to be most helpful in your study particularly of epistles, which is our focus in this module. Okay, so with that, Fu-Wei, would you mind reading Hebrews 12, 1 and 2 from the Legacy Standard Translation?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, Hebrews chapter 12, 1 to 2. Therefore, since we have so great a crowd of witnesses surrounding us, laying aside every weight and the sin which so easily entangles us. Let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of faith, who for the joy set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and has sat down at the right hand of the throne of God.
Okay, thank you. All right, so why don't you guys on your own, I'll give you a few minutes. First, identify the independent clause or clauses if there's more than one. And again, usually it's near the beginning, but not always. I'll give you a hint in this passage, it's not at the beginning. All right. And then secondly, just look for the connector words within the passage as well. All right. Okay, so let me give you a few minutes to do that. I'm going to pause the. Okay, so I'll leave the passage open here on the right. On the left, let's look at the first step, identifying the main sentence. All right, and what we do there is try to find a clause that's not dependent. Okay, and again, just as we go through these first two verses, was anyone able to identify what is the independent clause here, the main subject and verb in these two verses? Anybody want to offer their answer?
So, Pastor, I think let us run the race. I think that is the main clause or independent clause.
Yes, that is correct. Excellent. All right, did you guys catch that as well? Notice we have us as the subject, and the verb is run or let run. Okay, it's an imperative, and then the object is the race. Okay, that is the main sentence here. Let us run the race, and notice in this case it is in the middle of these two verses, not at the beginning, so it's a little tougher to identify. Now, sometimes you may not be able to see it, and I'm not sure where the main sentence is. Well, how would I figure it out? Well, that's where you may want to skip to the second step and just say, okay, well, first let me find all the phrases and clauses in the paragraph and then see which one looks like it's independent. So sometimes I've done that where I'm not sure. So I say, you know what, I'm going to just go to the next step and find all the phrases and clauses. And then as I work through that process, I think, oh, here's the independent clause. So let's do that part as well, where I said, let's identify the remaining phrases and clauses in this passage by looking for the connector words. All right. So I'm going to ask Paul to start us off here. And Paul, if you can, we'll go through each verse, just help us identify the connector words here in this passage. So looking at verse 1, what connector words do you see? Therefore, yes. All right. That's a subordinating conjunction. Since is also a subordinating conjunction. Of, yes. That is a preposition.
And
that's
a conjunction. Yeah.
Yep. Coordinating conjunction. Good.
Which.
What is that?
That is a what's the word for that?
It's right up here.
All right there. Yeah. Relative pronoun, right?
Okay. Yeah. Relative pronouns. All right. Anything else in verse 2 that you see?
With endurance. Yeah.
Yes,
With.
good, with preposition. Very good.
And before, right? Set before us.
Before. Okay.
And fixing is a participle.
Okay, good. Fixing. Okay, let's go back verse 1 though. Make sure we got everything. Are there any others? Anybody see any others? I see a couple more.
So,
Uh,
so, so,
so is that what you said?
yeah.
Okay, yeah. Now here's an interesting. So normally we would say is a subordinating conjunction, right? It's up here. Normally we'd say subordinating conjunction. Now, in this case, we have to ask, is it functioning that way? Remember, I told you there's a few words in English that are tricky. They're like little deceivers. The word for can sometimes be a preposition or a subordinating conjunction. The word that, remember, that is one of these tricky words, can be a subordinating conjunction or can also be a relative pronoun or a regular pronoun. And then there's the word so. Sometimes the word so, often is the word so in English is a subordinating conjunction, but sometimes it functions as what is called a superlative. That is the idea of very. When you want to say something is bigger or more, you might say he is very happy, or this book is very long, or you would use the word so. She is so happy, or this book is so long. So we have to recognize that the word so can be used differently. So how do we know? How do we check this? Well, what we do is, okay, let's look at the words that follow it. So if we say that, let's say, okay, so looks like a coordinating conjunction. What are the words that follow it? Again, notice the word of, so that starts the next phrase. So basically the words that follow it are great a cloud. So we have so great a cloud. Now we ask ourselves, is this a phrase or a clause? So Norman, you mentioned the word so I'll have you answer that. Is so great a cloud a phrase or a clause? And remember, a clause has a subject and a verb. A phrase does not. So all we're looking for basically is, do we see a verb?
Is a phrase.
Yeah, this is a phrase. Okay. So why does that matter? What is significant about that? Well, remember, a subordinating conjunction is followed by or introduces a dependent clause. Okay. So if we look at this here, so is followed by a phrase, not a clause. So in this case, the word so is not functioning like a conjunction. It's actually functioning like a superlative. It's just saying we have a very great cloud of witnesses, a large. So think of the idea of very. That's really what is being given here. Okay. So long explanation, but again, there's these three tricky words in English for when we're trying to do this. The word for, that, and so, because they can act differently. So the way you check that is look for what follows the word. And in the case of so, if it's going to be a subordinating conjunction, it will be followed by a clause. All right. Okay. Back to verse 1.
Yeah, I missed laying. Yeah.
Yes, what is that?
It's a participle. Yeah.
Correct. All right, it's a participle. Now, Again, remember the way to identify a participle is to see, do I see an article in front of it? Or do I see a subject in front of it? And in this case, we have neither. All right, so it is a participle. All right, any others in verse 1?
No.
Okay, anybody else see any possible ones?
What about surrounding?
Ooh, you had surrounding surrounding echo too. Yes, actually surrounding here is functioning as a participle. All right. It's modifying witnesses. It's describing which witnesses in this case, the witnesses surrounding us, those witnesses. All right, good. And the
This-
word, oh, sorry. Somebody
Oh,
want
yeah.
to say something?
Despising. Is that
That will be, yeah, the
despising?
next, we'll get to verse 2 in a minute. We're just
Oh, yeah,
focusing on verse
sorry.
1. Yeah. One more
And that
is, yes, that. And here, how is it functioning? Like I said, that can be, is one of those tricky words. And so we want to ask, how is it functioning here? Well, the easiest way that I've determined to figure out is for this word that, let me put all these up
it
here.
is a relative pronoun.
Yeah, how do we know that? How can we check that? The way I do it is to basically, if I were to okay, so the question is, how do we know if it is a relative pronoun
Hmm.
or subordinating conjunction here?
King Sat there.
Okay, the way to do that is to replace with the word which and see if it makes sense. All right, so if I'd say in run with endurance, the race which is set before us, does that make sense? And it does. And that tells us then, okay, if so, then it is a relative pronoun. Why does this matter? Because a relative pronoun is going to modify another noun. It's pointing to a noun. Okay, a subordinating conjunction doesn't modify another noun. It will modify an action. Okay, so in this case, the word that, the race that, or which is set before us, which is set before, or that is set before us modifies race. It's describing the race. It's identifying the race. Which race? The race that is set before us. Okay. All right, any questions on that?
Yeah, about surrounding, Pastor Tim. Is that not more like a verb in this case?
Okay, if it is, if it's a regular verb, then it must have a subject, right? And in this case, the subject, it does not have that. Even though witnesses looks like the subject, it's not, because the witnesses are being described here. They're not doing the action, they're just being described. It's a description of which witnesses. Remember, participles can modify nouns or verbs. So they can act as an adjective, or they can act like an adverb. One way to so the witnesses here aren't doing the action. And by the way, remember, if it is a regular verb, see, this is why I wanted to do this exercise to remind us of some things we looked at. If we look at the word surrounding, Uh-oh. Okay, is this a regular verb here? Because remember, those are our three options we have. It could be a regular verb, it could be a participle, or it could be, remember those things we called gerunds? All right, which is, so the verb, if it's a verb, well, we'll start with, if it's a participle, let's start with this. If it's a participle, there'll be no article and no subject. If it's a gerund, you'll likely see an article, because remember, a gerund functions as a noun. All right. Now for a verb, a regular verb, if it's ing, normally what you will find is it will have a subject and also look for the helping verb, is or are. Okay. So for example, if the phrase was this, the witnesses surrounding us, or the witnesses are surrounding us, or we could have the surrounding of the witnesses. Okay. Now, the witnesses surrounding us, I'm saying here it's a participle, because the witnesses are not doing the action. I should make this lower. And they're not the subject here. Now, in the second example, the witnesses are surrounding us. Notice that additional helping verb are. This is acting like a verb, because the witnesses now are the ones doing something. In the first one, they're just being described. Which witnesses? The ones surrounding us. The second sentence is actually saying the witnesses are surrounding us. So they're doing the action. In this third example, notice the article the in front of surrounding. This is a gerund. All right, now the surrounding is a noun. Okay. We discussed this back in Unit 3. We spent some time on it, so you may need to go back. I don't remember which session, but this was the challenge with the ing, the verbs with an ing ending, because they could act like three different things depending on these other factors. So you got to look for them. Okay. Does that help at all, Paul? Did that jog your memory a little bit from before,
Yeah.
or is it still?
It did. Thanks a lot.
Okay. Anyone else questions on that?
Sir, I have one question.
Yes, sir.
It may be wrong, but because you added the word which, let us run with endurance, the race, the word that, you put a bracket which, correct?
Yeah,
So,
here.
yeah, is it possible, because I'm reading it so many times and I see a meaning, but if we remove that is and just say that let us run with endurance the race set before us, is that right to do, or is that wrong to do?
Yeah, if you do that, okay, so basically do this, the race set before us.
Yeah.
What
Yes.
you have done now is actually change the word set to a participle.
Oh, okay.
Because now set before us is describing the race.
Okay,
But there's
understand.
this a verb with no article and no subject. But when we put it back in, the race which is set before us, now this entire clause is still modifying race, but the author is doing it in a slightly different way. Notice in the next verse, we have the exact situation you mentioned, Norman, and it's the same word, who for the joy set before him. You guys see that?
Yes.
Now, in that case, there is no that is. So the author changed it a little bit and instead just has the verb set before him. And so that's modifying joy. It's describing joy. And therefore it's acting like a participle. But in terms of what it means, it's basically the same thing, whether or not you have which is in there or not. Both ways describe the race. So in English, you can use a few different ways sometimes to express a meaning. So there's really not a lot of difference between those two. And your diagram will look almost exactly the same because again, set before us is modifying race. In this case, that which is set before us. In the next verse, it is simply just set before him. Modifies joy. Does that make sense, Norman, or?
Yes, yes, Pastor, it makes sense.
Okay, that's a good question. It's a good observation. Any other questions on this first verse?
I have a questions about let us run. Is it
Yes.
let us run one cross or two crosses?
Is one what? I'm sorry. One or two what?
Is it one cross or two crosses?
I'm sorry, I'm not understanding. Two
Clauses. Is it one or two clauses?
oh, clauses. Oh yeah, good question. Let us run. Let's see, how can I explain that? All right. The question is that one or two clauses?
Yeah, that's the question.
Okay. All right. In English, there are, so we're talking here about imperatives. Remember, imperative is a command, and there are different ways to express the command depending on the subject. So if I'm giving you a command, I would say, run the race. Okay, that is, the subject is you. Even though it's not written explicitly in English, we often just give the verb, but the implied subject is you. But if sometimes you might say, if I want to talk to all of us and be more not as direct, but still make it a command, I would say, let us run the race. And here the subject is us. All right. So it's a really less direct command. All right. And some of you guys, if you're really into this stuff, it's called adjussive. If you don't know that word, don't worry about it. But basically, this is a command that is talking about, now I'm not just directing it to you, but I'm just saying all of us need to do this. Let us run the race. Or another would be, if I just want to say, let me run the race. Okay, that's sort of the subject is me, and it's really a command I'm giving to myself. And in English, the way we express that, if the subject is you, either you singular, one person, or you plural, we just say run. We just give the verb, run the race. You could say you run the race, but that's in English, normally we don't do that. Now, if I want to say either first person me or first person us, I would say let us run the race or let me run the race. Notice the addition of the English word let. That's how we express a command in the first person, us or me. Now we could say, there's also in the third person pronoun, we could say let him or her run the race. Okay, here the subject is him. or her, depending on. Okay, that again is a command that's being given, but it's regarding, so I'm speaking about someone else. Let that person run the race, but it still has the force of an imperative. Notice again the word let. In English, that's how we express a command in the first or third person. So that's a long way to answer your question, Chulong, but it is one clause. And that word let is part of the verb run, let run. Does that answer what you were asking, or is it you're asking something else?
I understand. So when we when we meet imperative, so we just treat it as one unit of the clause, right?
Yes, yeah. Yeah, let run would be the verb, not just run.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Isn't English fun? Sorry, I know, and it's late, and you want to just relax and listen to me, but they're making you do some work. So, but I thought it would be helpful for us to sort of do this as a review to refresh ourselves, because it's been some time since we did this. So these are excellent questions too. So I'm really glad you're asking. I hope it's helping. All right, let's do verse 2, and then if there are any more questions, we can answer those together. Pastor Philip, since you started us on verse 2, why don't, if you don't mind, go ahead and go through it with us and point out the connector words.
Yes, fixing is participle.
Yes, there's no article and there's no
Yeah.
subject.
Subject, yeah. So on is proposition.
Yes, correct. On Jesus. Good.
Yeah. So and is another conjunction.
Yes,
Coordinating conjunction.
very good.
Perfect. Perfecta. So another of is preposition.
Good.
I think who is relative pronoun.
Yes,
I think
right
yeah.
here. Who
Yes.
is that? Okay, good.
And for right after who, for is another preposition. And
Okay.
then the joy set before is also preposition.
Joy said before this one.
Yes.
Okay.
Endure, I think. Despising, the shame. Despising is participle.
Yes.
And the shame and is coordinating conjunction.
Yes.
And set down, I think at
Yes.
is it preposition?
Yeah.
I
Notice
think.
it's up here in
Yes. And at the right hand of preposition of the throne of God, another preposition of God.
Good. Now again, looking at these two participles, a quick way to tell if it is acting like a verb is just look for, do I see a helping verb in front of it? Do I see is or are or was? And there is
No.
not.
Yeah.
Okay. And then there's no article or subject. So I know it's a participle. Okay, good. Any questions on verse 2, guys, or on either verse before we move on?
So Tim, is endured a participle too?
Ah, great question. Yes, we have to ask, okay, what about this word endured? Here, I'm going to highlight it over here. All right, is the word endured a participle, or because it looks like it could be, is this a participle? Okay, so we have to look, okay, well, first, do I see an article? Okay, no. Is there a helping verb?
No.
No. Do I see a subject?
I think subject is who.
Yes, subject is who. Now, this is a little tricky. We talked about it at one point, how sometimes the author will insert a phrase inside of a clause. Okay, for example, if we were to say, the man who was hungry ate his lunch early. Now here, notice the man, we have the man, and then who was hungry. Okay, that is in this case, a clause that is inserted between the subject of this sentence and the verb. You see that? So the subject here is the man. The verb is ate. The man ate his, and then the object is lunch. All right. But notice there's in this case, a clause that is inserted in between the verb and the subject and the verb. We will see that quite often in English and quite often in scripture as you're looking at passages. Let's see, what would be the let's see, the sermon. What would be a good one? Let's see. The clock at his house was broken. All right, again, notice we have a phrase here, at his house, which has been inserted between the subject of the sentence, the subject of the clause here, and the verb, was broken. Again, all right, so that's exactly what we have going on here in this passage. We have who, and then there's this this phrase that is inserted, for the joy set before him endured the cross. All right, so that's my who endured the cross is my clause there. And then I've got another one inserted between the subject and the verb. Now, why is that done? Well, it is done because the author, and this is true in Greek, not just English. In fact, let me look real quick at the passage here in the Greek text and just see. All right. Let's see. Who for the joy. Yeah, so the same thing. Here's the pronoun who in Greek, and then for the joy before him, and looks like the word endured. Yes, so here's the verb here, and here's the pronoun. So in Greek, in this case as well, that is what has happened. The author, whoever he is of Hebrews, wanted to, he put this for the joy set before him between the subject and verb. Why did he do that? Because he wants to make sure that the reader understands that he's emphasizing something. So over here, if we say the man who was hungry ate his lunch, I want to make sure that you understand who was hungry modifies man. So I put it right after man. Instead of saying this, I could have said the man ate his lunch early who was hungry. Okay, that in English, that's more difficult to understand what it's modifying. So what I did is I put it right after the word that I want it to modify. Same in the second sentence. The clock at his house was broken. Okay, this is clear. I'm saying the clock, which clock? The clock at his house. But if I said the clock was broken at his house, let's see, let's do this. Let me show you how this changes the meaning. Okay. These two sentences, let me just focus on them here. These two sentences are saying something different because of where I placed the phrase. The first sentence is saying the clock at his house was broken. The phrase is describing the clock. It's telling me which clock. All right, the clock, which clock? The clock at his house was broken. Now the second sentence, and this is how I would diagram it. The clock at his house, so at his house is modifying the clock. It's describing which clock, and then here was broken just completes the sentence. So I'll put a line here to tell myself that is what is being modified here. Okay. Now the second sentence, so this sentence is telling me which clock, the clock at his house, but the second sentence is saying something different. The second sentence is saying where the clock was broken. It's describing the action in the second sentence. By putting it at the end of the sentence, I'm now saying the clock was broken at his house. Okay, so this would be where it was broken. Whereas in this sentence, the phrase at his house was describing which clock. So the placement of the phrase in this case affects the meaning of the sentence. You guys follow me? The questions? There's questions asked. John Cheng, did you have a question?
No, I understand it already.
Okay. Now, so I know I'm taking a long time with these explanations, but I want to make sure we understand because you guys are asking really good questions that, and these are typical things we're going to see in other passages. So the challenge is, well, how would I know that who is connected to endured the cross? Well, that is why we do this exercise. You look for the connector words, and you may be wrong at times. You know, maybe we said, okay, endured. Okay, that's a verb that ends in ed. There's no article. There's no subject. There's no, so it looks like a participle. So you might say, okay, that's a participle. Well, what will happen is, as you try to put the diagram together, it won't work right, and you'll see that at another step. All right, so don't worry about it. Sometimes you may identify incorrectly a connector word, and that's okay. The whole process, all 4 steps, if you do all of those steps, normally some of the mistakes we make will be corrected in another step. Okay, because something won't make sense later. But here I just want to explain to you that at times phrases or clauses can be inserted inside of another clause. And that's often done because it wants to clarify, the author wants to clarify what he's modifying. And so again, in the first sentence, the clock at his house was broken. The phrase modifies the clock. It's telling us something about the clock. It's identifying the clock. But in the second sentence, at his house is identifying the location where the clock was broken. It's modifying the action. Whereas in the first sentence, it's modifying the noun. Okay? So you'll see that again as well. Sometimes the phrase will be inserted between the subject and the verb. Sometimes the phrase will be inserted between the verb and the object. All right, we'll see examples of that as well. Okay, any other questions?
I have a question
Yes.
about the word set. This the set, the word set modify the cross become
Set.
yeah set,
Set, yeah.
become the voice that's participle.
Yes, and that is based upon the nature of that word set. So here, let me go down here. So we ask that the verb set is an interesting verb in English. It is to put something down, right? I am setting my phone down. I set the phone down. Set can look like so I set the phone down, or I am setting the phone down. Now, the verb set can actually be can be present tense. Let's see, how do I write this? The phone set down on the table. Right. I set the phone down. Okay. This verb set in English can spelled the same way. I set the phone down could be present or past tense. So it's just a way, there's no, we don't have, for past tense, we don't have I setted the phone down. That's just not, normally that would be, you would think in English, you add an ED, that's past tense, right? For example, right, they play football, or that would be present. They played football would be past tense, right? That's normally how it is in English. Well, in this case, setted is not, for whatever reason in the language, it didn't evolve that way. So in English, the word set can be present or past tense, depending on the context. Or it could be a participle, spelled the same way. Right? Because notice participles often, they can have an ED ending, but in this case, the word set does not have an ED ending in any usage. There's no word setted. All right. In modern English. So that makes this word set a problem word. I'm sorry, there's a lot of problem words in English. So yeah, look at poor Pastor Dwayne. He's like, oh, I give up. So yeah, this is just one of those special cases, Shulong, that you just need to know about this particular word set. There's not too many like that in English that I remember, where the verb The verb can look the same in past tense or present tense or participle.
So when we diagram it, can we treat it as participle?
Yes, it modifies joy. It's describing which joy. The joy set before him. So again, sometimes you may catch this as you're going through the diagram and you're asking yourself with each phrase or clause what it's doing. All right, because notice here, also when you say for the joy set before him, it might look like joy is the subject. You might say, well, here, okay, so I have this who, I have for the joy set before him. Okay, that sounds like, it looks like joy is the subject. And it looks like set before or set is the verb. Okay, so you might say, this is what it looks like. But here again, that sentence, that wouldn't make sense. That's what's being described here, that the joy set before him. Joy is not doing anything here. Joy can't be a subject. It's not doing the action. It's being described. All right. So that might come to your mind as you're going through the actual diagram in step 4 or step 3, even as you're asking yourself what the phrase is modifying and how. Okay, again, I know this is complicated, and this is why I encourage you to be practicing this diagramming, because the more you do it, the more you're going to spot these things. And right now, if you don't do it very much, this is like overwhelming. There's like all these things I got to remember. But it's like learning a new language. The more you practice, the more you'll be able to see these things. And when you can see the structure of the passage, that is what reveals the author's intended meaning, because it'll show us what he is emphasizing, what is less important in the passage, what is modifying something else. And so hopefully we can get to that part here tonight. If not, we'll definitely get there next Tuesday. But so that word set is just one of those words that because the way it's used in the past and present tense, it's spelled the same. I think, let's see, what's another word like that? I can't think of one right now. There's a few words in English like that. What's that?
Cut.
Cut. Yeah, I cut the meat. That could be past or present. You could say, I cut the meat as you are cutting it. Or you could say, I cut the meat, meaning I did it earlier. All right. So how would you know the difference? Well, you'd need more of the context. Maybe if you said, I cut the meat yesterday. Okay, now you know, oh, that's past. But if I said I cut the meat now, you would know that's present. Okay. There are a few others. Some of the verbs that end in T, actually. Another one, I let him speak. That could be past or present. A lot of times we just need more of the context to know which it's referring to. Okay, let me put all of this. Okay. Does that answer your question, Shulong? Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Any others? Let me do this. Any others? Now, if we, no, I'll wait on that. Okay. All right. Well, next step then. So what do we do here is, okay, now that we've identified the connector words, all that I do is just simply, okay, each connector word, again, remember, a connector word introduces a phrase or a clause. Okay, and it indicates the end, the next connector word indicates the end of that phrase or clause. So if we go back to our paragraph here, we would say, okay, therefore, there's connector word since, so I break it here. We have so very great a cloud. Again, remember, so is a superlative here. It's describing how large, it's saying a large cloud, very large cloud of, there's my next connector word, witnesses surrounding us, laying aside every weight and the sin which so easily entangle. Again, oh, look, there's another so, and it's acting again like a superlative. It's just magnifying the word it modifies. So you could say again, which very easily, so easily entangles us. Now we break it here at the independent clause. And notice sometimes the punctuation can help us. So here's a comma here. That's the translator. And put the comma there to indicate there is a, indicate the break. All right. So sometimes the punctuation can help you. So let us run up with endurance. Now, you may not recognize at first. You say, okay, the next connector word is that. Let me take out. And you may not recognize, oh, the race actually goes with let us run. But maybe you didn't catch that the first time that you go through it, but that's okay. We would figure that out when we do the diagram. So all I'm doing now is just breaking up each phrase and clause as, and notice, as a, by the connector words. Okay, so now we already talked about this. For the joy set, or sorry, who goes with endured the cross. Okay, so there we go. We've broken down the passage now into the phrases and clauses by identifying the connector words for that, okay? That's all I've done. I haven't done anything else. I just simply broken them up into their phrases and clauses. Now, the next part of the second step then is to be identifying whether I have a phrase or a clause, okay? And so that is, so now let's identify each phrase and clause, okay? And so I've started that to give you an example. And again, remember, a clause contains a subject and a verb. But a phrase does not have both, and that's the key, a subject and a verb. Sometimes a phrase may have a verb, but not a subject, or a verbal, but not a subject. Okay? So I'd like you to take a few minutes and just go through. Here's the list. I've broken out all the phrases and clauses. I'll just remind you by connecting here. Clauses which have been split by a phrase or a clause. All right, I think I've caught all of them. Okay, so why don't you go through and just spend a few minutes and just identify, is it a phrase or a clause? And again, you're just looking for it. Look for a verb and a subject. If you can find it, you have a clause. If not, you have a phrase. Okay? And then I've given you example here, like for example, since we have so great a cloud. That's a clause because I have a verb, have, and I have a subject, we. And it's a dependent clause because it is introduced by this subordinating conjunction. So I know it's dependent on something else. It's connected to something else. Of witnesses is a phrase. There's no verb here. Okay, so just go through each of these phrases and clauses and identify them as such. Okay, I'll give you a few minutes to do that, and hopefully we can get through this before before the evening is finished. Any questions? Okay, I'll let you